This is the Distinctly Detroit podcast, the only pod that explores why one wants to be in the D. I am your host, Fyodor Ship III, the director of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. Join me as I interview students, scholars, leaders, and innovators about living, working, and loving in Detroit. On this week's episode of the DDP, our guest has traveled extensively as a dancer, filmmaker, and producer. She is a curator of place-based performance and installation art, specializing in community engagement. She is the founder and executive director of Sidewalk Detroit, a coalition of creative space strategists and artists working at the intersection of creative placemaking, research, advocacy, and socially relevant art. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Dance and Film from the University of Michigan, and the DDP today welcomes Ryan Myers-Johnson.
Thank you.
Welcome. Glad to have you on.
Glad to have you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you coming in today. Now, where are you from originally?
I'm from Detroit.
You from Detroit?
Born and raised.
Okay.
Yes.
What side of town?
West Side.
West Side. Okay. What high school did you graduate from?
I went to Detroit School of Arts, which is not far from here.
It's right around the corner.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And what led you to the University of Michigan?
You know, I had a sister who went to University of Michigan, and I also had some of my first experiences as a professional dancer at University of Michigan. So when I was about 14, I went to perform in the Harlem Nutcracker at the Power Center. My sister was a student there, and I stayed in her dorms doing some of the performances, and it was just a really cool experience. And, you know, I also applied for scholarships, got it. Money took you there, good experiences, so it just made sense.
All right, go blue, baby, go blue. You, as we mentioned earlier in your intros, you traveled extensively as a dancer, filmmaker, and producer. I was curious as to what led you to dance. What led you to becoming a professional dancer and wanting to study dance as a major in college?
You know, I've been dancing since I was a baby, basically. So, you know, started when I was in preschool, you know, with tap and jazz, and it's just always been a big part of my life. So dance along with, you know, theater, photography, I've just been, you know, really interested in creative expression. And throughout my life as a Detroiter, Detroit really nurtured and grew my artistic self. So I, you know, studied dance in school, was a member of, you know, All City Dance, danced at, you know, Detroit School of Arts, and it's just always been a part of my life. So it's hard to say like what drew me to it, except that it's something really innate. But dance is really just one piece. You know, I've always just been interested in storytelling, in places, in community. And so while I have a dance practice, I probably have just been more enchanted by the overall concept of making stories about people, whether that's through dance or through theater or through film or through experimental art.
Yeah. See, that led into my next question was, how did you come to have that joint major of dance and film? Like, I never see that too often.
So actually, I majored in dance, but I came into the school as a film major. So I, you know, at the young age of 18, decided I no longer wanted to dance because I had done it for so long. So I actually quit dancing and went into LS&A. At the time, I don't even know what it's called now, but it was Literature, Science, and Arts School. And I studied a lot of things. So from film, philosophy, I had a stint in Japanese language. But I couldn't leave dance. So I was taking dance classes and participating in the dance department, participating in the School of Music this whole time. And really, I just kind of looked at my life at one point. I think I'm like a sophomore, and looked at my life and decided none of these degrees probably matter in my course of work as a creative person. So I think I'll just take what feels the most natural, which was dance. But I stayed with film. So
Okay.
Yeah.
And then after you graduated, you spent 10 years kind of traveling around as a dancer, as a professional dancer, filmmaker, producer, film
Yeah.
producer, and you even went as far as Japan. What were those
Y-
experiences like?
Yeah. So I did a lot of things. So a lot of
Yeah.
exploration in my career. Um, Went to the Carolinas for a bit and then straight to New York for, just the excitement and the experimentation of it. So I had the opportunity to intern and work as a production assistant at 40 Acres and a Mule. I did a lot of experimental and site specific work in New York, which is what I do now. What that means is you're looking at a place like an alley or a storefront or a plaza and creating work that responds to that place. So I worked with choreographers who were really in the more experimental realm. And so that's where Sidewalk kind of gets some of its inspiration, is doing work that's rooted in place. And from there, I really just got curious about travel. So I took off and just traveled a lot of places. And from there, I did a lot of things. So, really, not just dance. I taught English, I taught dance, I did photography. So, just wanderlust to see the world. And, when I decided I want to kind of settle down and really focus on making socially relevant work, that's when I moved back to Detroit.
Okay. So I'm just curious about what was your like what was it what's the dance and film scene like in Japan? What was that experience like?
I since returned to Japan through a collaboration with University of Michigan, actually, School of Architecture.
Okay.
So that was about a few years ago. I went over um, to participate in an exchange that some students in some towns in Japan have with Brightmoor. So I do a lot of work in Brightmoor here in Detroit, and we were really just looking at placemaking there. So we were in a town called a little city called Ishinomaki, which was largely destroyed by tsunami some years ago. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember the
I
huge
remember seeing
tsunami.
that. Yeah.
And so they were dealing with a lot of spatial trauma, like places that literally been washed away, people that died. And so they were looking at creative placemaking as a way to heal spaces and how to revitalize this town, because people are moving, gets destroyed. It takes a lot to rebuild. People just go and move to Tokyo or bigger cities. And so we had an interesting experience kind of sharing, what it's like in Detroit, because we've dealt with spatial trauma and economic fallout. I'm sorry, I'm just going on and on. So
No,
this
no, you're good.
the Japan life, I think Japan story is a whole another, we probably have to have a
Whole another
podcast talking
discussion
about
about that.
that.
Okay. No, I just
Yeah.
again looking through your bio and everything, I just thought it really interesting.
Yeah.
And it was, sometimes it's hard to sort things out in
Right.
bios and backgrounds,
It's
but
so
I thought
much.
it was really interesting that
It
you
is.
went to,
Yeah.
Japan. And it was like the cultural work, and I was just curious, like what. I never hear anything about Japanese dance, so I was just curious, if, what you
Yeah.
might have experienced over there. And that, but
Well,
yeah, we can.
I would say,
Yeah,
to the extent that I experienced Japanese dance with really, I would say I did, participate in some theater there, but this was more of interest to me. I
yeah.
don't know how much it reflects on contemporary Japanese dance, just looking at No, which is like very traditional, kind of austere opera forms there,
Okay.
and looking at, bunraku poetry. I mean, so I guess I would say I was probably more interested in theater and placemaking while I was there. Um, of all, I mean, how I didn't think about talking about Japanese dance, but I've also really into Buto, which is a
Yeah.
that's a whole
Buto.
nother.
Yeah.
So
Buto.
Buto
Sure.
is, how do I say it? It's basically like it's basically looking at Japanese traditional theater and subverting it to reflect kind of like the inner one, what some traditional Buto practitioners would say like the inner darkness, but I would just say like the inner conflict in humanity.
Okay.
So maybe it's like their traditional form of modern dance. I don't know. That's a big topic, but I love still, Japanese fine arts and traditional arts. So there's a lot to say about it. And we've kind of experimented with thinking about bunraku, for the Sidewalk Festival, and Buto for the Sidewalk Festivals. There's a lot of practitioners that kind of look to those traditional forms as inspiration here as well.
Okay. Well, you say you had the wanderlust, you traveled, you kind of made a decision to come home and put your roots down and get committed here. So tell us about Sidewalk Detroit and what that's all about.
Yeah, so I founded Sidewalk Detroit 10 years ago. So this is our 10-year anniversary.
Woo-hoo.
Upon returning to Detroit, it was when I came back to Detroit. So before founding Sidewalk Detroit, I came back around 2009, which was, the height of fallout from the financial crisis of that time. Foreclosures were happening, and just the narrative around Detroit was pretty negative. And people, I found myself having these conversations with people, like constantly asking, why did you come back? Did you not make it in New York? This kind of thing. And I'm just like, no, I came back because I wanted to come back. I love Detroit. And so this seemed like a foreign concept that you could love Detroit as it is at that time, So anyway, I thought, like, what is a way that I could kind of create joy, create the experience of Detroit that I have, that I love, which is a Detroit that has this vibrant, unique culture, amazing landscape and architecture. The built environment of Detroit is unique, and it's gorgeous. And anyway, as I mentioned before, Detroit really nurtured my creative self. And so I wanted to just celebrate that. And so I kind of worked together with a small group of friends and family to create a Sidewalk Festival with Artist Village in Old Redford. So we looked for a space that was beautiful as it was, someplace that artists would be inspired by, just by the way it's built, without having to ask artists to do a lot. And so we decided we would, bring everything out into the street. So this is kind of what I started doing at University of Michigan, more of what I did in New York, which was, we won't use any stages. We're going to ask people to participate with artists on the block. So I'm thinking about my experience with experimental art in New York, but also just the experience of the block party that we used to have. For me growing up in the 80s and 90s, we had a lot of block parties where you block it off, somebody breaks open a fire hydrant, ice cream trucks, barbecues, porches. And so how do I kind of combine the art and the block party and create this atmosphere that just gets people to celebrate Detroit? And so I intended for it to be a one-off thing, but it was such a success and community members really responded to it that we just kept going and going. And so that's how we started. And since then, we've expanded our work to really focus in on public spaces in Detroit in general. So a lot of work in green spaces and parks, a lot of work with the planning department of the city of Detroit in thinking about how to bring community members into planning processes so that they can plan their spaces. And it's also, expanded even outside of the city, which is, again, how I ended up back in Japan, doing work in Pittsburgh and Grand Rapids, the whole metro area. So yeah, our mission now is really just to advance equity, enjoy, and address spatial trauma through really thoughtful programming, arts and culture, and collaboration with residents.
That is really awesome. So just to clarify, you say so you started the Sidewalk Festival in Old Redford,
yeah.
and that the community really responded. That was initially going to be a one-off,
Yes.
and then you've been doing it ever since.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it's
yes.
distinguishing the Sidewalk Festival from Sidewalk
Yeah.
Detroit, the organization.
Yes.
Okay.
Sidewalk Festival is one of our major programs.
Okay, and you mentioned that you kind of expanded to working with other groups. Some of the thing read is you're doing a project at Eliza Howard Park.
Yes.
Tell us about that project.
Yes, so when I was living in Brightmoor, moved back to Detroit, I lived a lot of places, but settled in Brightmoor because, again, I love the landscape. Once again, got that question, why are you moving to Brightmoor? La, la, la. And so I'm like, it's beautiful. It's green, it's lush, the park. And so realizing that Brightmoor doesn't have, people don't think the same way that I'm thinking about Brightmoor. So I started to think, what is a way that we could get people to integrate more into this beautiful landscape? And I lived across the street from Eliza Howell Park, which is Detroit's fourth largest park. It's over 250 acres. The Rouge River runs through it. It's an incredible natural resource, an important ecosystem. And so I initially thought that we would just do Sculpture Park. I had lived across the street from Pratt Institute when I was in New York, which has a great sculpture park. And I thought, this is a park, nobody's here. Let's do sculpture. But I quickly learned from talking to residents that people were not interested in that initially. They were interested in art in the park, but they wanted to see other improvements first, like signage. They wanted safety. They wanted ways to walk about. They wanted amenities. The park had been through a lot and had, remained for a long time kind of at the bottom of the barrel in terms of funding. And so I thought, I guess people are asking for this. Maybe there's a way that I can do something. So that was really the beginning of a really long process of fundraising for the park. We worked with residents to create a planning master plan for the park. We've since invested over $500,000 in infrastructure improvements in the park and have been doing ongoing programming in the park since 2016, focused on health and wellness as well as arts. And, this year, finally, the city will be investing over $3.5 million in repairs in the park. So we're really excited about all the work and advocacy that we've been able to do there.
That is really cool. I think that's a good park.
Yeah.
My producer lives over near the park and always wants to do stuff over there. So
Yes, we've been able to partner with Brilliant Detroit to make some really great things happen with kids in the neighborhood and with nature walks. And that's another thing that Sidewalk Detroit really needs to do, which is partner with other organizations, because we're ultimately artists and kind of thinking creatively, visionary about what could happen, but we have to bring it back around to what's relevant to residents. And working with organizations like Brilliant Detroit or the University of Michigan Detroit Center, that's how we connect and really learn, like, what do people want to see happening.
What's going on? Okay, so what special plans or activities are coming up for this year's Sidewalk Festival?
So we are actually launching our Urban Artist Residency Program this year. What that is we work with residents. This particular community that we're working with, two communities, Joy Southfield and East Canfield. We work with residents to identify what do they need before we talk about art. What is the need in the community? What are the challenges in the community? And then we identify with them, is there a space that we can work through that can try to address some of these challenges? So is it a particular community gathering place or a place that needs to be revitalized, or is there a lot that needs some help, or a farmer's market or an annual event that we can partner with? So we're working with community members to identify those needs, and then we look for an artist who can work with them to create a piece that can address those needs. So it could be a mural, it could be like plaza, could be seating furniture, it could be garden, but it really could be anything. We just are working with community to find out how can we address community needs through creativity, through art, through architecture, through design. And so through the artist residency program, we'll be bringing an artist in for 3 weeks during the summer to build a permanent installation to address those needs. And so we'll be working with East Canfield and Joy Southfield on those residencies this year in celebration of our 10th year.
Oh man, you are doing big things. Okay. And so as an artist that focuses on community and place-based art, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to ask this question, but how do you've kind of addressed a lot of things. You do a lot of, when you go into a community, when you go talk to the people, how are you able to get them to share? I mean, how do you build that relationship, build up that trust to get them to really tell you what's going on or how they feel about things without them feeling as though you're just coming to exploit their community?
Well, so I think we want to move at the speed of trust first and foremost.
At the speed of trust. I'm still in
Yeah.
that quote. Write that down.
Well, so we study a way of facilitation, a way of having conversations called Emergent Strategy. It's a book by Adrienne Marie Brown, and it really focuses on making deep connections and going deep with a few people and just really forming relationships and not being extractive, because we actually don't ask community members to contribute anything but what they want to contribute. Um, and it's really, I don't know, I don't want to say it's easy, but I would say that I think Detroiters get this rap for being like really guarded and anti, but I think Detroiters know when you're being authentic and we're bringing an offering. So we would never do anything the community doesn't want at all. So they're in charge because we don't own the spaces. Yeah. They own the spaces. So if we work with them, just say we're going to work community on a mural project. So we did a mural project with community member in Brightmoor called Girl Notice. And she actually came to us. She wanted to, her name is Kathleen Hurd, and she had been trying to do a project that focused on capturing the portraits of girls and young women in the community and working with them on developing some empowering viewpoints. But she wanted the girls to be really noticed. And so that's what she wanted to do. So what she needed from us was our, I guess, experience as artists and curators in managing and leading the project. So we really just executed her idea. And that's really what we kind of aim to do, is have conversations that create comfort, that create trust, that are resident led, and then we make suggestions. So for the artist residency program, we heard what they wanted. We helped them develop a mission for the art. And when we looked again at that mission, what are the things that they're trying to address? Then we see, okay, this is what they want to address. So let's research artists that might be able to address some of these needs and work together with them. So we do that work, then we bring it back to them and they choose who they want to work with. We don't make that decision. Of course, we make the decision on who we're researching to even present to them, but because we've asked them to say, these are the things we want out of an art piece, like, okay, we want it to be this vibrancy, we want it to address intergenerational work, or, et cetera, et cetera. One example is we have a piece up not too far from here, right outside of Seva restaurant. It's a series of, it's a art installation on a parking lot. That's a series of portraits.
I just saw that the other day. That's beautiful.
Yeah, so that's the Sidewalk Detroit commission. Yeah. We commissioned the artist Judy Bowman to create those original pieces. But the developer,
that is a dope piece. It really gives a vibe to the area. It makes it feel more enclosed. It makes it cohesive. And,
I'm excited. I'm glad that you liked it. But so with that, they approached us. They wanted to do an art piece. They don't know what they want. And so we convened a council of community members and artists. And through a series of conversations, they started to identify that we want to focus on the history of Sugar Hill. This is the Sugar Hill Arts District. What does it mean? So it's kind of the original Black Bottom of Detroit. So we brought in historian Jamon Jordan, who was able to share with us, some of the music and the dance and the art and the food that was relevant there. And they also wanted to say, there's a lot going on, gentrification. We want to really showcase Black people, the Black history and the Black heritage here. And so we look for an artist who can capture the history of Sugar Hill. So we look for an artist who was from the area and who was really focusing on storytelling through her artwork. And she had that kind of, Harlem Renaissance, like 1930s, kind of jazzy vibe to her work. And so her, along with maybe 10 other artists, we showed them to the council. They voted and they chose her. So then we commissioned her and helped guide her through the process of the work. But that's an example of just, we're going in like a blank slate. We don't have any agenda except to make a work that the community members will be proud of.
Okay. And I think as a person who runs a space in a place, I have an affinity for your work in that you go into places and spaces to beautify, to change, to explore, and then I'm really impressed with the way you bring in community. I want to have an offline conversation because the university is going through a whole big project and we need to involve community in some way, and I'd love to get tips on how to best do that. But as an artist, what types of responsibilities do artists have to the community? You've seen, again, very community oriented, very community and in space specific. So I'm just curious, or how do you see artists playing a role in community development especially in a city like Detroit? What other some things that can be done in the city?
Okay, so
I
I
know
think
that's a lot.
no,
Yeah.
it's okay. Like there's I think it's two questions. One is the first is do artists have any responsibility to the community? And I think that artists are community members. So if we ask ourselves just as people, do I have any responsibility to the community? I don't know. The answer is probably the same. It varies,
Yeah.
like do people have to make things that are relevant? Maybe, but also people just want to survive. So community focused work isn't for every artist. Some artists just need to be artists and just make work that they're self actualizing. And I initially didn't enter into this work because I wanted to focus on community. It was more of a selfish idea that I just wanted to celebrate the Detroit that I love. Just annoyed. I think that people kind of felt like Detroit is such a horror story, or like it's so scary to be on Detroit streets. Okay, it is scary sometimes, but like I think I just wanted to recapture the spirit of my youth, which was more walkability and more joy, just being outside. So it wasn't that I was necessarily thinking I'm gonna just be a community. Like we weren't even using those words 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like community or placemaking. It was just more like, I love these streets. Let's have a block party and have fun. So I don't think that artists have to serve in the way that we're serving now. However, if you want to make work in Detroit and you want to create work with people, then you do have a responsibility, especially if you come in with this kind of I'm going to make some kind of change narrative that a lot of people come to Detroit with. They're like, I'm going to save Detroit. I'm going to help
Put
Detroit.
on their white hat and hop on their horse and ride
Yeah,
down.
right. Look, nothing's happening. La la.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same idea, even though I'm from a Detroiter and I was actually living in the community of Brightmoor. When I first looked at Elijah Hall Park, I thought, I'm going to make sculpture here because there's nothing happening. That was my thought. And then if I had done that, if I had tried to do that, I probably would have succeeded because I had already had some funding and support. So I could have done that. But I probably would have offended a lot of people. The work wouldn't have been well received. It might have been isolating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have gone over well. Yeah. And I would have learned the hard way that you can't do things for people without people. So once I had some conversations just with my neighbors, I learned quick.
Chop that one up for later too. Can't do things for people without people.
Yeah, that's what people really, I wanted to make a sculpture park because I thought it would be great. But that's not what residents wanted.
You thought it would be dope, but the community was like,
they were like, wait. They were like other things first. So we did do sculpture in the park. We have a really large sculpture that's on display now. It's a stick house, which people come from all over to see. We commissioned an artist. We had a artist residency. We did that with community members. They did create the parameters for us to commission him, the artist, Patrick Doherty. It was a big deal. And it still is. It's a really magical place, but we couldn't have started with that. Yeah. We put in paths, walking paths. First, we helped create signage around the park. Then we created the master plan. We demonstrated that we could bring money and resources for the overall needs, and we served as an advocate to really push Eliza Howell Park forward. And we worked with people who already were working to save the park. They were friends of Eliza Howell Park. Yeah. So that's what I think artists should do if they want to go into community. They don't have to, but it would be in their best interest to do it, lest they, become one of those Detroit horror stories where it's just like, white knight kind of savior complex.
Come in. Yeah, that was really cool. We're going to do some collaborating outside of this. But we're going to transition real quick to what we call our lightning round. Our lightning round is a space where we ask all our guests these same series of questions. And it's more about your experience in and around Detroit and your kind of views on some Detroit stuff. Okay. And the first question is, what's your Coney order?
Well, just a Coney dog. With some fries and maybe like some chili cheese fries too if I'm really feeling risky.
Okay. Verner's or Faygo?
Faygo.
Okay. Better Made or Lay's?
Better Made.
Okay.
Better Made barbecue. Or
Favorite Motown artist?
oh, I don't know. Smokey Robinson, I
Okay.
guess. That's a big one.
Favorite Detroit athlete?
Oh, I don't know Detroit athletes very well. A Big Ben?
Okay,
I don't know.
that's fine. That's fine. Favorite Detroit sports team?
The Pistons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite place to go in the city?
Oh my God. You said lightning, so I had to answer fast.
It's just a term.
Okay, I'm just like, there's a lot of places. I'm gonna choose Eliza Howell Park. There's no place like it in the city.
The first vote for Eliza Howell Park. Okay. And then lastly, where can we find you?
SidewalkDetroit.com or just at Sidewalk Detroit on all the socials. Hashtag Sidewalk Detroit.
Cool. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Ryan Myers Johnson. Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you so
We really
much.
appreciate the work you're doing in the city and excited for the upcoming Sidewalk Festival and going to make a trip out to Eliza Howell Park to check things out. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this is the Distinctly Detroit podcast. Please like, subscribe, and rate our podcast anywhere you get your pods, but you can find us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, the University of Michigan Detroit Center, and you can get all our pods and other videos from other events that happen here at the Detroit Center. And until we see you all next time, thanks for listening. This has been the Distinctly Detroit podcast. This is a production of the University of Michigan Detroit Center. You can find us anywhere you get your pods. Please like, subscribe, and rate us. This podcast is executive produced by Marlon Franklin, edited by Ranza Stanton, and written by Shaylin Jones and Fyodor Ship III.